All right. Better late than never. We're here for episode 40. Was it? What is it, Thomas? 42, 43 of the Sumer
Three, I
Sports
think.
Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitrov. Thomas, you've had a long day, as have I. We're back here. I get to hang out with one of my favorite people in the world. We get to talk running backs. Thomas, how you doing?
I am so good. I was flying through the streets of Atlanta on my e-bike to try to get back here on time for 9:30. I know it's a little late. Thank you for being understanding. I couldn't wait to get on here. I was telling the buddy that I was with, we had a business meal going on, and I had to get back. So I was bragging to him about our show, to be honest with you. So anyway, so excited to be
Well,
back.
it's a show to brag about. I mean, I feel like not often. It's really funny because I've gotten a little bit of feedback the last few days about the show from people in the league, and it is really this idea that you can have an analytics guy and obviously a former GM and evaluator talk football. And so for those of you that are first to the show, we might have new people live here because of the late start time. I'm one of the VPs at Sumer Sports. Thomas is the CEO of Sumer Sports. Thomas, of course, a 12 and a half year general manager for the Atlanta Falcons, a two-time executive of the year, and also 2 Super Bowl rings as a member of the Patriots in the mid-aughts. I used to be the VP at Pro Football Focus before I joined Sumer. So that's going to be a reset here. Thomas.
And by the way, a PhD in mathematics with a really good understanding of football. I mean, you do not have that anywhere else. While you're talking, I got to close the door. Hold on, keep going.
Okay. So we got Thomas closing the door there in his office. By the way, I got to be honest with you, even though I do have some really cool stuff here, including a Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl T-shirt. Your office is goals for me. I got this like kind of cool like setup here for a PhD, but you of course have like very very nice vibes there. We're talking running backs today. We're talking NFL draft. I just had a really exciting set of planning meetings for our draft show, by the way, which will be the first night of the NFL draft. Thomas and me from Atlanta with support of our great people at Sumer Sports, including Sean Clement, Paul Sabin, Parker Fleming, Tage Seth, all of those folks, with their data, with their metrics, will be helping us. But we're full speed ahead. I think I'm really excited about where this is going to take us because this is the first time, in a few years, I haven't gambled on the draft, right? I used to gamble on the draft when I was a member at PFF. We of course have information coming in and out because of our product at Sumer takes in club IP. So I'm not gambling on the draft. So and furthermore, if anybody's been following the betting markets have been really slow to go. Just the history of this. Back when COVID happened in 2020, there were no sports on at this time. And so the sports books had to generate, I think, revenue and products for their books. They had a lot of draft props open now, and it's kind of waned over the years because the books have really gotten killed by sharp people betting on draft props. And so we really haven't seen a ton of the market. We talked about last week, CJ Stroud is the favorite to be the first quarterback selected, the first player selected, followed by Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis. The running back position, this one's actually fairly solid. Bijan Robinson of Texas, who we'll talk about first, he is the drastic favorite to be drafted with the first pick among running backs. Now, we don't know a market yet for when he's going to be drafted. I've seen anywhere in the mocks from 5 to out of the first round entirely. Let's just start with him, Thomas, because this is a guy 5'11", 215. We see as far as speed is concerned, that's a big running back. His 40-yard dash is well above average for the position at 4.46, especially for his size at 5'11", 215. When you watch Bijan Robinson on tape, what do you see as far as him as he projects from NFL or to NFL from college?
Well, let me start by saying I see a stud. There's no question about it. A strong, big, forward-leaning, runs behind the pads type of guy, has vision, cutback vision that we talk about often. He has what we call often, I've said this many times, he's got power angles about him, right? He's bending, he's running behind his pads, he's delivering a blow. He also has the speed to hit the hole fast and accelerate through the hole, which is a big thing, right? an interesting versatility element to him as well, right? Because he can catch the ball and take it upfield, the yards after catch, et cetera, et cetera. This guy's got complete ability, truly, and we can talk about overall the draft class on the running back side. There's probably one or two maybe projected to be a first rounder. Of course, he's a bona fide one. Look, the reality is he may go 5, he may go 14. I heard there were rumors about him going to one of my favorite teams, the New England Patriots. You never know. And, like I said, he doesn't get out at 20 in my mind. He is a really established football player. I love watching a guy like this because I think they're so important for these teams that are growing with their quarterbacks. Remember, I said many times with Matt Ryan, we got a stud in there in Michael Turner early on. He wasn't a draft guy, but he was a guy that we went out and got because you need to develop the young guys with a really good running back like this.
Yeah, and we've seen it. I mean, like, look, I'm of the analytics ilk, so I'm always going to bristle a little bit at using top value on running backs, and the reason is clear, right? When the top running back salaries, the franchise tag, for example, is at 10 million right now. That's the average of the top 5 APY at the position. That's I believe that's the non-exclusive. Exclusive is 10 to 12. And so when you get drafted, let's say in the top 5, you're going to be making 8 million or so. And so the question is like that surplus value of 4 million is going to be a lot different than if you take a wide receiver where the top end market is 20 to 25 to 30 and making the same amount. That's where I think it gets messy. Now we have seen, look, Travis Etienne, running back drafted in the same draft as Trevor Lawrence. Travis Etienne took a lot of the burden off of Trevor Lawrence last year in a 9-8 season, in a great season for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You even look at, Isaiah Pacheco with the Chiefs, a 7th round pick. Patrick Mahomes is injured in the playoffs. They need somebody to step up, and he's a tough runner. The point again being like maybe you can get him in the 7th round. It's really tough though. And we do want to talk about running backs because it is one position where it is, Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is one position where the skill set translates. It's less of a difficult translation of the skill set from college to pro because, a lot of what they do as runners is about the same when there isn't like this drastic shift in what it takes to be a running back from college to pro. It's very similar. And that's different than something like offensive tackle or quarterback or wide receiver. And so, oftentimes I think we're in a weird way, the top end guys, we might be a little bit better at identifying who's good. The tricky part, of course, is like where their situation comes in, if they come in with a good offensive line or not.
So to your point there, yes, you have offensive line who, if they come in and they're projecting in the pros, and now given the rules, they're not able to contact as we planned, and we're not able to develop them the same way. This is one position that can run, don't have to always have contact, of course, which they don't have in practice, but they can still work on their craft, and you can get a really good gauge. Teach them how to protect in their own way, understanding protection, teach them to catch the ball, teach them to run, see, develop. I mean, I think you can develop a running back without the background of hitting that you need in some of these other positions. So you're spot on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we look at some of his athleticism profile, right? So you're looking at 5'11", 215, as I said, 4.46 as the graph said. But you're also looking at really good explosiveness, 37-inch vertical, 10.4 broad jump. I mean, when you look at that size speed combination, this is a guy that played for you. Jarius Norwood is one where like that, when you look at that profile, now Norwood wasn't as good of a running back as I think people project Bijan to be, but a very good like athlete. Even somebody like Marlon Mack, who was 1,000-yard back in the league, a combination of being a taller guy, but also having like full on like good athleticism. Of course, Mack had the Achilles injury, so we haven't seen, sort of the best of him since then. Now, here's where I want to get to, because this is where we look at statistics for running backs and what translates. So Bijan Robinson averaged 6.1 yards a carry at Texas. That's really good. That's 35th in the country. But that isn't really necessarily what projects, right? Because when you play for great programs, they're going to give you yards before contact. The one that projects is yards after contact. And Bijan Robinson last year, 4.17 yards per carry after contact. That's, if you average 4.2 yards per carry in the NFL, you're an average running back, let alone after contact. And this is the one where I think and this is a word that I've heard a lot, and I want you to define it for me, or a phrase for you to define it for me. 104 missed tackles forced at the college level. That was first in college football last year per Pro Football Focus. Like, the contact balance to me is what I think sets him maybe apart from some of these other guys. And there is going to be a comparison with this next running back we're going to talk to. And I think the difference, though, is that Bijan Robinson has that above everybody else in the whole class, the ability to break tackles and to run after you break tackles. There's one thing about breaking tackles, but then there's also this, can you gut them for another 40 yards after you break a tackle? And I think Robinson has that.
Bijan does
in spades here.
Yes. And without going into a ton of detail on this, I've said before that ability to hit and continue to go on, that ability to have the body control to catch yourself, to have the balance and the body control to get yourself back into balance and moving forward is a big part of what we love as professionals when we're evaluating our running backs. Let me also say, I'm a big fan of Steve Sarkisian. I mean, where Steve is and what Steve will do for these young guys that are coming through his program and get them ready for the pros. I'm a full-on kudos to that guy. He's going to have his guys ready. I'm excited about see where Bijan, how it all plays out for him. And the team
Steve Sarkisian, by the way, one of the more misunderstood, I think, coordinators in the last 10 years in the NFL. Thought he did a pretty good job with your Falcons offensively. It was just sort of who he was compared to was maybe a little unfair, and Kyle Shanahan, who's I think a Hall of Fame caliber coach. I think Sarkisian in 17, I thought your offense, I mean, you almost made the Super Bowl again. And then in 18, you had a really good offense as well. And he goes to Alabama, he goes to Texas, has had nothing but success on that side of the ball, to your point. And, now you're seeing the fruits of it with a guy. I mean, they have a plenty, like Worthy, the wide receiver. They got plenty of guys on that team that are going to be NFL players.
Well, look, to that point, I'll raise my hand right now. And this was a really interesting thing for everyone to hear. I mean, we, of course, moved on from Steve. There's no one who understood moving on more than Steve Sarkisian as a head coach, right? I remember him coming into Dan and me in different occasions, Dan Quinn and myself, when we let him go. And it was, I completely understand. I've been there before. Don't worry about me having hard feelings. That's the stud factor of a guy who's been a head coach, who has had to make tough decisions. He was in that spot. Should we have made that decision? Maybe not. Quite honestly, I would say not. I wasn't a fan of the next wave of what we did. Look, let's just call it the way it is. He's a very talented football coach. He had his demons that he admitted to, and he was working on them. And like we all know, we'll always work on those. But man, he is a guy that can carry a program in my mind. So
yeah, I think and good for him. I think the college game, look, like there's a lot of precedent for coaches who. There's not a ton of precedent for college coaches being great NFL coaches. You have Jimmy Johnson. You have that's the biggest one for me, a Hall of Fame guy, one of my favorite people in the history of the NFL. But you do have some evidence of NFL coach goes to college, figures some things out, goes back to the NFL. Pete Carroll being one of them, of course. That one to me is the shining example of a guy who, Carroll was defensive backs coach with the Vikings, coordinator and head coach with the Jets, head coach with the Patriots, goes to USC, blue blood program, much like Texas, finds himself a little bit, goes to Seattle. And, as somebody who's been critical of him in the past, he very clearly runs a great program in Seattle. Right. And so, with Sarkisian going to Texas, like there's a lot of pressure there, much like there is at USC, but he seems to be pushing that thing in the right direction, even though it is going to be tougher for them in the new SEC. I think that they are getting talent in that building. Let's talk about a talented player as well. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs, who played at Alabama last year, he was a transfer from the previous season. I think so. This is where I watched him live, and I thought to myself, that looks like Alvin Kamara to me. And he's a guy like very smooth, very just. He even does the thing, and I know it probably pissed you off when you were the GM of the Falcons, but like he did that thing where you kind of like walks out of bounds but he like walks out of bounds in a way that gains like 2 or 3 yards more than he should. Like Jahmyr Gibbs kind of did that thing, and he very, very like Kamara like out of the backfield, 1.83 yards per per route run, which is a fabulous number for a running back. He caught 44 of 52 targets, dropped only one pass last year. Like Bijan, so this is where the comp to me falls apart, though. 6.1 yards per carry last year, this exact same mark as Bijan Robinson. Only 3.39 yards per carry after contact, just 38 tackles missed forced. That's 69th in college football. So a good back for sure. And we'll look here at some of his athleticism. When you look at that 40-yard dash, that's 4.36. That's among the best. When you look at distributions like this, obviously to your left, you have guys running closer to 5 flat, which is bad. To your right, you have guys closer to like the 4.2 range. The vertical dash represents who Jahmyr Gibbs is. If you're on the right of that distribution, you're better. If you're on the left, you're worse. So he is clearly one of the fastest running backs in college football coming out. Now, only 5'9", 200 pounds. 200 pounds is pretty good for 5'9", but still not a terribly big guy. But he's going to be more of a change of pace guy, I think, at the NFL level, which can make you a lot of money. I mean, you think about who's the franchise tag back in the NFL right now, Tony Pollard. That's a change of pace guy, in my opinion, somewhat similar. Thomas, what do you think about Jahmyr Gibbs?
Wow, so much to talk about him. First of all, let me say I really like him. I really like his speed, his explosiveness. When you watch that cat from snap to whistle, he is overly impressive, right? He's got very nice vision as well. He's a guy that's going to get around the corner when he needs to and accelerate fast up the sideline when he needs to. He's a cut across the grain type of guy who, again, has the vision to do so. And times he'll make people look foolish, as you know, because he's just got that ability to get away from people and run. His burst, I love. His explosiveness, I love. I think there's versatility there. I don't know exactly what his numbers were. What were his numbers catching the ball, by the way?
Yeah, so he had 44 catches on 52 targets, 1.83 yards per route run, which we're going to talk about Devon Archane in a second here. Like sometimes that's offense dependent, but that's incredibly efficient. And when you think about that Alabama offense where you lose in a matter of a few years, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, you lose all those wide receivers. For Bryce Young to still be efficient without wide receivers that immediately come to our mind, that's a good running back, right? You think about, when we talk about Kamara in New Orleans, New Orleans had, they went from the Colstons and the Devery Hendersons and those guys to the Michael Thomases, but eventually Michael Thomas was the only guy in town, and their tight end, Jimmy Graham leaves. They're not great. And Kamara picked up a lot of slack in the passing game. Fun stat about Kamara. Kamara caught 81 passes, 3 or 4 consecutive years, exactly 81, which is really funny. And like a guy like Gibbs did that for Alabama. He could possibly do that for a team that is struggling at the wide receiver position insofar as who they are, working with there. So Thomas is up walking around. He has the agility right now of Jahmyr Gibbs, it looks like.
Let me say Kamara, first of all. Let me tell you, I loved him. I hated playing against him. I was just sitting with Mickey Loomis at the owners' meetings here, spent a couple hours with him. He was so kind to hang out with me, and he actually snuck me in the party. By the way, you want to talk about a bruise on your ego, 30 years in this business, and I didn't have a pass to get into the party at the owners' meetings. I have to deal with that, of course. Mickey was such a great – think about this. Mickey, this is heresy to the New Orleans people and to the Falcon people that Mickey, the GM from the Falcons, got me into the party and was helping me, just like it was when I picked Kamara as my very first player in fantasy football in my life. What I'm talking about here, when we start talking about, the comparison to Kamara, I love this type of running back. Remember, change of pace backs are vital in the league. They have a really good spot. Sometimes they're a little bit of a novelty. If you get them at the right time, if you work with them and they have the speed, because ultimately you want the speed. And remember, we've talked about this a little bit. Change of pace back is honestly, that phrase, COP back, is contingent on what your lead back is. If your lead back's a 25 guy, 225 guy, and just a thumper and a first and second down guy, and you have a COP that's waiting in the wings to come in there, run some routes for you, mix things up. Change of pace, just so everyone knows, literally the change of pace was There's a difference between that 225 guy who's running at you, boom, and banging into you, versus all of a sudden you get a 200-pounder 5'9" who's stop start agility guy, explosive guy.
Well, you were a defensive back, right? Like, and people might not know this, but when I was in high school, I played free safety, and like, it's one of those things where you have to, like, we called them rumbles when I was a kid. When your running back's a rumble, you got to chop your feet, get down, make sure the guy doesn't flatten you, right?
Right.
If you go from that guy in a game to a guy that's like the road runner, and you chop your feet like that, and you're the last line, it's over, right? Yes. And so, like, to your point, it's like a baseball player, having the donut on his bat for and then hitting the donut off and actually getting the swing of life at, like, those things matter. And it's not as acute as it was in the past where you ran the ball 40 times a game, like, certainly, right? But even when, like, I think about your Atlanta teams with, the best offense that you guys had with Freeman as the lead guy and Coleman, Coleman never blossomed when he had the opportunity to be a full-time back when he went to San Francisco, even with you guys. But my God, when he played that year where he was the change of pace guy, like, I remember you guys played Denver, and those linebackers like Brandon Marshall and Trevathan and guys like that, fantastic football players. And Tevin Coleman made them look like third graders at times because you guys were hitting it up with Devontae, and they're kind of gearing up for that. And then you run the arrow route to Tevin Coleman, and it's over, right? And so there's value in that sort of pacing, like I'll call it, in an offense. And and Coleman was, a minimum investment guy for you guys, like it was second round or something like that, like not a first round guy. And obviously was hugely important for you guys having the best offense in franchise history, really.
Look, once again, Eric Eager completely enthralled the fact that he's talking about Tevin Coleman the way he knows him, not just some roundabout guy. Like, literally, by the way, full on kudos to you that you know all about Tevin Coleman. It's not that big of a deal. I get it, but you hit the nail on the head. He was so valuable for us. He was such an important change for us. And again, any of you up and coming guys, any of you people that do aspire to be in the NFL, you get that feeling and you figure out how you can get a combination back situation for your head coach. Man, I think it's a great, and by the way, you can get those change of pace backs. You don't always have to get them. Of course, you don't have to worry about the first round. You can get them in second, third, and fourth, and they can be difference makers for you while you're developing your offense. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what Gibbs does.
Well, to that point, Alvin Kamara was not really even a starter at Tennessee, and when the Saints picked him, people forget this, but like, they had Adrian Peterson on their roster and Mark Ingram, a former first-round pick, on their roster, and he was not supposed to contribute at that much, and then he just won a spot. And in fact, they traded Adrian Peterson, I want to say, to Arizona that year, and Kamara was the guy, more or less, for the next 4 or 5 years. Here's one that's interesting, and this has a Sumer twist to it. So Zach Charbonnet of UCLA. Now, Zach Charbonnet used to play for Michigan. The first ever college football game I ever went to with Michigan was with Sean Clement. This was 2019. Sean, now, of course, one of our colleagues here. Zach Charbonnet was the lead back for the Michigan Wolverines that day. And I thought Zach Charbonnet sucked. I did not think he was any good. I was like, this is a slow, like, bad vision, blah, blah, blah running back. That's what I thought. Of course, I am a fool because he gets beat out. He transfers. He goes to UCLA, coached by Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly, by the way, used to, owns a small part of PFF. No one knows that, but he is a very analytical guy. Does I think a really good job there. And he gets behind this physical. And when I used to play college daily fantasy sports, and eventually I had to wise up and roster Charbonnet a few times. So I actually watched him and have come around to him. Charbonnet, 6 feet, 214 pounds, runs a 4.53. That's actually like a very, very good number for a back his size. Like, when you're above average, when you're, over 6 feet and, 215, like, that's a very good number for a running back. And, you look at him, he averaged 7 yards a carry last year. That was 8th in the country, 4.15 yards per carry after contact, which, again, we remember Bijan Robinson 4.17. So we're kind of right around that range. 53 missed tackles forced, so 31. And 31st, he averaged 1.3 yards per route run in the passing game. Like, this is a very productive college running back. And I love where he comes from, because UCLA, when you look at like their profile, they're very not Pac-12. They very much, like, their offensive and defensive lines are physical, big dudes, like guys that you're going to run behind, like when you're in the NFL. And Charbonnet took advantage of it better than anybody has that I've seen in the Chip Kelly era. The question is now, he's not a change of pace back. He's a legitimate starting kind of, when I look at him, I think of like an ace running back, but he's not necessarily of that ilk of Robinson. Where do you put him as far as this class?
So it's funny. I'm normally not a real fan of that upright runner, right? I'm just not. I mean, there have been guys over the history that we know that can do that. They can tote the rock, running upright, 6+, 6'1", whatever it is. Yep. And again, as I brought up a number of times back in my old school, is sort of annals, the idea of what was his name? My God, Eric Dickerson, guys like that.
Yeah, Robert Smith was always injured, Eric Dickerson ran out of Eric Dickerson. Eventually, the hamstrings and the ankles and all that got to him. You know, it's like, it's a hard way to live in the NFL as a running back, standing straight up like that.
And as you know, again, when you run upright and you're tall, even if you're strong, the Charbonnet grew on me for sure, because I watched, as you were talking about watching last year, and I'm like, God, I don't know where I am with this guy. And then I started watching him more with Chip's offense, and I'm thinking, I like this guy more than I thought. Look, I project him like probably most people do, mid-second round. It's going to be an interesting thing, by the way. Like, how many is there going to be? One first rounder? Are there going to be 2 second rounders or 3 second rounders? Yep. It will be interesting. But I think Charbonnet is like, he's just one of those guys. I believe, what was his past situation? Watching him in the vids that I saw, I thought that he could catch the ball and get upfield. He had a style to him that, even though he was upright, he could continue to run upon contact, right? He was getting extra yards. So I don't hesitate to think that he's going to be a starter in the league. But again, he's not necessarily my style. Yeah. But I do see the positives on, of course.
Yeah, incredibly athletic, 37-inch vertical, 10.2 broad jump. 37 of 44 targets, which to me, like, I even think, when Chip, and I wasn't a huge college football fan when Chip Kelly got onto the scene, but one of the things I noticed when Chip came into Philadelphia, LaShawn McCoy stopped catching so many balls, right? Mm-hmm. And when Andy Reid was his coach, a lot of catches, like I think he had 80 one year, and then he stopped. But like, the evolution where they'll actually throw to their backs in UCLA now, that's a good thing, I think, for them professionally, because you can answer that question a little bit. I do think that and this is a weird comp, because Alfred Morris was a 6th-round pick. But when I kind of see him running, I think of Alfred Morris in that, like, if you get him in an offense where the quarterback is a rushing threat, and all you need to do is when the quarterback kind of hands it to him, mm-hmm. and the linebackers are just standing still, you just need a guy to hit it up and be like a very definitive runner. That to me is how, I was watching a former old Commanders game from like 2012 with Robert Griffin, and I'm like, Alfred Morris had the easiest job of any running back of all time, but at least he hit the hole and rushed for 1,600 yards. I think of Charbonnet like that. I don't want Charbonnet going side to side. I don't really want him doing any more than one cut. But like, if you get him in an offense that does that, I think he could be super effective. And like, so it really, I think, does depend upon like what you're asking of him in an offense in the NFL.
Yeah. And look, there are places, and I think when you come back to a team who drafts someone and they see the benefits, again, it comes back to making sure that you put together your entire your running back group, right? Your stall of running backs is really, really important. Please, everyone understand that. You're not going to do the same. You're going to have some versatility. Versatility, I will continue to say, at any position is vital. And at the running back position is vital as well. If you have a big, tall, strong guy like this, he can work into your group for sure. And I don't know the character side of him, but the fact that you have someone that has an understanding and a vision enough, because he shows the vision, I think that can be, of course, very positive.
Here's a question, because both Gibbs and and Charbonnet have been transfer guys. That is a new thing in college football now, right? Like it's existed for a while, but you used to have to, even back when I played, if you wanted to transfer the same level, you had to sit out a year, right? You didn't get to. So if you really wanted to leave school and go somewhere else, you had to really commit. You had to commit to the bit and sit somewhere and redshirt for a year and play on the scout team and all that stuff.
So
Nowadays, when you see a guy who's transferred, does that ever lean into your analysis of a player, or does that just make you ask one additional question? Like, how does that work for you as far as when you talk about character? Because I think it's so ubiquitous now that you can't immediately say, hey, something wrong happened, but you also can't necessarily immediately rule out something bad happening.
yeah, I think we're gonna, as builders, we're going to really look in and we're going to immediately think, okay, what was the reason for this? We really need to drill into that. That's going to be an important point for us. We're going to go as far as not only doing our research, we're going to, by the way, I think I mentioned this before. We'll go as far, this sounds odd to probably a lot of people. We usually would have private investigators look into these kind of people even more, right? The people that have transferred, because you really want to dig in and make sure that when you're looking at the owner and the owner's like, are you sure you're taking this guy? He transferred, and you have all the answers, right? There's nothing worse, by the way, when you draft someone and the next day, I've had this feeling. It is a heart dropper when you wake up the next day and there's an article there. So-and-so had this brush with the law, and that was one of the reasons, and you don't know about it. It's your easiest way to be in a really, really big pickle with your owner.
Yeah, for sure. And like I've said this 10 times on this show, but like every time that I had a numerical projection of a player that was much better than where he ended up drafted, it was always a personal issue. It was always either injury or they had that jerk factor that I just didn't have information to. Okay, let's move on to Devon Archane. Devon, by the way, 5'8", 188. However, he does have the speed to match. This is a 4.32 guy all the way to the right here when you look at his distribution. So a very fast guy. Vertical jump, though, only 33. So not maybe as explosive as some of the other guys. When you look at, his time at Texas A&M, this is an offense that will throw to the backs, but he wasn't particularly he was on the field a lot. He only averaged 0.66 yards per route run, but when they did throw him the ball, he caught it. 36 of 44 targets. He averaged 3.6 yards per carry after contact, which is 49th in college football. 53 missed tackles forced, which is 31st. So he did some stuff, at Texas A&M that got your attention. I think he's very clearly, though, a notch below the top three guys that we've talked about, Thomas.
A notch below, but let's realize that there are people like this, and when you look at Devon and you look at his numbers, and I know you mentioned they not as explosive as you would like. 4.32, however, we'll take that with a 33-inch vertical. I think that's what his vert was, right? Yep. Because that speed is legit and it's real. Maybe not up to the same level, but a good guy, again, back to, I don't want to repeat myself, back to that mix of players where you have if you have the ability to have some sort of novelty to your offensive game and your running back group, to me, this is a guy to look at. Now, where he goes, I mean, I don't know where he's projected with the groups. I mean, personally, guys like this can go in the third and fourth round, and they can be legitimate enough. They may fall, who knows? But the reality is there are benefits here. It's interesting that he actually plays out as maybe the fourth best running back in the league. So you never know.
Yeah, I'm mostly using some aggregate mock type of stuff. I think here's another good question. I think before we get to our last guy and close a little bit, because when you look at running backs, Bijan Robinson is going to be the first guy taken here. That's great. It's not always a lock who the best guy is, right? And oftentimes it's sort of like styles make fights for a team. So I think about 2020, the Chiefs have the 32nd pick. Jonathan Taylor is widely thought of as the best running back in that class. DeAndre Swift is also thought of very highly. J.K. Dobbins is also thought of very highly. And the Chiefs go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who by I think many people's projections, was probably third or fourth guy on that list. But at least to the Chiefs' mind, he was what fit them the best, right? And of course, they probably weren't correct. He probably want Jonathan Taylor in hindsight, but you think about the following draft, it was Najee Harris, and then it was Travis Etienne, and I think you can make a case that Travis Etienne is probably the better back now. Even though Harris has a lot of cool things to him, he's tough. He can catch the ball. He can take a big workload. Etienne has been injured for a year, but was very effective last year. I think it's the question is like, where do these guys stack up? I think a lot of it depends upon what an offense is looking like. If your lead back is a smaller guy, you're going to go after a Charbonnet as your two in the draft, right, as opposed to a guy like Archane. And so I think it really does depend. Or I talk in a good look. I'm not an expert on running backs, but I kind of, when I watch these guys, I can kind of tell the differences between them. It's like if you have an offense that's a little bit more where the running back has to extend things, like maybe an outside zone kind of team, like maybe you don't want a certain guy, versus if you are more of a power counter man team where your running back's got to hit it up more quickly and be tougher like that. So I think a lot of it is styles make fights, Thomas. And like that can really, if you're thinking about betting the draft, you're thinking about just prognosticating like we will on the Thursday of the first day, like that can really throw a wrench into your predictions, because we're really not necessarily as close to the action as far as what the scheme is looking for as these actual teams are.
Yeah, and just for perspective on scheme, I remember when we were in the process of deciding on the types of running backs, we would go in, Dan Quinn and I, especially, of course, Mike Smith and I would do it, but Dan Quinn and I, for sure, with his staff, we would go in and talk to all of our, whoever our coordinator was at the time, and talk about scheme and how we could utilize. As much as I'm not a big believer in the coaching staff dictating who you truly want to draft, believe me, I tap into it and we have our conversations. Our scouting department and our personnel directors and such were out on the road, and they have a really good feel for who would be the next up for us. But it was important for me to understand as a GM what the scheme was. Again, not to protract on this, it is a really important thing to make sure you have the right fit. All of a sudden you draft someone who's not necessarily the right fit, doesn't have an understanding of it, that might not have exactly the ability to really thrive in an outside zone scheme. And you could be in a really tough situation. You've drafted someone in the third or fourth round who are just playing special teams for you. And when they get on the field, it's not a fit for you. So just remember how important that is.
Does that make it hard as a scout? Like, and is that really, so now the Patriots have changed schemes a lot. I mean, they were a 3-4 team when no one was a 3-4 team. They were a 4-3 team when the whole league tried to switch. When you're a scout and are you scouting for scheme, or are you scouting traits, and are you allowing the decision makers above you, the GM, the directors, all that, are they like re-weighing the traits? How does that go? Like, just to kind of get off on a tangent a little bit here, when you do change schemes at the team level and you're an evaluator, like, because oftentimes, one of the things is like scouts last longer than some of the regimes, right? And so like when you do have those changes, are you looking for new things, or is that something where you're scouting normally, you're scouting as you would always scout, and then you let the decision makers kind of make a decision based upon your data there?
One of the very important things to understand is every year, whether it's a new head coach or a changing of the scheme, we usually like to sit down with our staffs, our coaches and our personnel department, and have our learning seminars, right? Where are we with scheme? What are we looking for? How have our position requirements changed? So when our scouts go out on the road, they have an understanding of what we're looking for at the running back position, or the tight end position, or the outside backer position. Really, really important. The good teams out there who spend the time more than just a random check the box. They really spend the time with their coaches, interacting with the personnel department when they go out and they have an idea. Let me say this to your question beyond that. We grade their scheme, we grade their traits with scheme in mind. So ultimately you're going to grade that player per the running back position. You're going to grade him for all of his talents with the metric tree that we have set up at that position. as well, when you're writing up your summary, it's imperative that you are talking about what we are talking about, how we would fit into the scheme. You can't blindly just write up players and give them grades and not mention where they are. It's imperative that a scout is very descriptive with how the subjective side. Look, we're Sumer Sports and we're an analytics company. We're about numbers. But in the end, and you've said this, and I'd love you to opine on this quickly from an analytics standpoint, there is a place for subjectivity within our evaluation.
Well, you remember when you guys signed Brandon Fusco, right? Like that was John T, and it was like, hey, like you were looking for guards that were really good at outside zone and not really good at anything else, right? Like that was kind of the value you were looking for. And like that, so I'll take it back. Like analytics can steer you in the wrong direction if you don't do that. If I just take all the data and add it all up and say this guy's in your verbiage, a 3, right? Yeah. Then I'm missing because I'm looking at league averages, and you're not a league average team. When you guys were running, the Shanahan and then the Stark offense, it was like you wanted outside zone players, and you didn't really give a shit what he was like on power counter man because you were never going to run that on your team. And in fact, and this was the Belichick thing too, and I think you said this on the Wharton pod, which is great, where like Mike Vrabel does these 3 things really well, and that's exactly what we're going to ask him to do. So who gives a shit what he's going to do everywhere else? It's if I can go to you and look at the data, and again, this is the thing that analytics can help you with. If you say, look, I really just want a guy who can scoop the hell out of backside run plays at left guard, then I can just look at those plays and be like, he's actually a 6 there. And now in the open market, he costs a 4. So you're getting, and again, we don't add, but you're getting a 2 of surplus here just because of the way you think about the game and run the game versus, and it's the same thing in the draft. Like if you draft a guy who is very good at what you do, and not very good at what everybody else does, the rest of the league might think he's a scrub, but he might be very good in your system. And again, that's how you find value in the league. And that's how analytics can go from being something that's a blunt instrument that can't find that value to something that is actually probably the best at finding it because it's being paired with a great question, which is, can you find me this guy that has these traits?
Look, I was, again, reiterating that I was in Phoenix at the owners' meetings and talking to certain general managers about this, and it continues to come up, right? The idea that, it's really important to know what's expected out of your players, right? Scheme related. It's so important to know the direction. It's important to know that you are grading that player for what he is, skill wise, but it's imperative that you know what your team is doing, what your team is looking for. We can go on and on about this, but I don't want to overplay it. But if you don't have a grasp of that, if you don't have a grasp of where Kyle Shanahan is coming from with his run game, and you're not understanding that as a scout and or so especially as a general manager, man, you are losing so much ground in this business. Quite honestly, I don't think you'll be there. I don't think you're going to thrive. I don't think you have an opportunity to be a general manager if you're not one of those guys that keeps up more on just, I am only grading traits. Traits are great, no question about it, meaning you're grading the player. You have to have a well-rounded idea of how you're delivering it. Last thing, it was imperative that in those final summaries, albeit subjective, that you were painting a picture. And we can argue about this. We could argue about it within Sumer Sports, right? How important is that final summary in painting a picture? It's important for the head coach to know what he's getting. It's important for the scouts to paint a picture for the GM when he's up there getting ready to pull the tag off the board. But in the end, yes, it does come down to the numbers. And that's what we're trying to get to, right? To show these general managers and football people, subjectivity is great. It's amazing and it's really important. However, do not overlook the elements of objectivity and the numbers that can provide so much more. This is where the issue is in the NFL. When you get general managers and personnel directors who are uncomfortable with data and they get a little unnerved by it, that's a complicated thing. They start to push away and think, I'm going to go to what I feel comfortable with. And quite honestly, that's where mistakes can happen. Big picture.
Well, and football is football is a game where aggregation is difficult, right? And it's difficult at many levels, right? So I can tell you that I have a left tackle who's a 6 and a right and a left guard who's a 4 and a center who's a 5. And like, I can't just take the average of those guys. I got to know how they work together. I got to know how, what scheme is my left guard always going to be a guy who is helping the left tackle, or, am I going to be more of a team that shades to the right guard and this guy's got to block head up, all that stuff that has to matter. And it matters for players too, to your point. Like, I can go through the metric tree and be like, this guy's a 6, a 5, a 4, a 7, an 8. And then the final evaluation is putting it all together. Like, as a guy who in college, I had like a 37 in vertical and I ran a 4.6. Like, I had those things. I was a crappy player because I couldn't put it together. The person that just graded me on the individual stuff was probably, oh, this is a player. And I wasn't, because I couldn't put it together. Everything in football requires a confluence of analytics and subjectivity to put those things together in the proper context, to weigh them. And, the individual components require data, but you also got to be able to write that final summary and be like, this guy's an athlete. You can't play ball. Like, that's, and that's an important thing as well. And that's a hard thing, because we want to compartmentalize things because they're easier to measure that way. And the whole matters obviously more than the sum of the parts in that case.
No question. Hit the nail on the head. And so everyone knows, again, I keep saying, I saw the pictures of this guy dunking a basketball. So he has athleticism. We always said there are pure athletes out there, but they may just not be fit to take it to the next level.
I didn't have the mental makeup to be a good football player. Ultimately, and it's a lot easier to say now that I, am older and I, I'm comfortable in myself. But that was the honest to God's truth. Let's do our last play here. This is Tank Bigsby of Auburn, 6'2", 210, runs kind of an average 40 at about 4.56, vertical jump of 32.5, broad jump of 9 feet 11 inches. So, a good athlete, and that's why he's kind of up here. He was only 71st in yards per carry, but he averaged 4.17 yards per carry after contact. So you're looking at a guy that just under a yard and a half per carry before contact. And you think about this Auburn, right? Gus Malzahn gets fired. They go with Cadillac Williams, one of your nemesis, back when he was on the Bucks as the head coach. Auburn was a mess last year. And so I think that there's some value here in a guy. He forced 61 missed tackles. This is a guy who very much was overcoming a lot of adversity as a member of the Auburn Tigers. Does that, I think that I kind of like this guy as far as didn't get a lot of opportunity to really shine there as far as efficiency's sake, but the underlying data with him does look promising at the NFL level.
Yeah, I mean, another big guy, as you know, and that has a tendency to run upright. He's not one of those guys that you're thinking, wow, he's going to get behind his pads and just lay the boom and run over people. There were a couple things that were concerned me. I liked him well enough. He's, in my mind, meaning, and I don't mean to be negative, but remember that 6 area, the 5 to 6 area in our grading world is 5 is adequate, 6 is good. I mean, you're teetering on a lot of those areas in all of his, whatever his metrics are within the metric tree of the running back that your team is presenting. I would say that the thing that caught my attention is as he was trying to turn the corner, getting around left or right, there was a little bit of gathering himself to get around that. No, I love a guy that's going to get around there, jam his foot in the ground and just burst out, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just felt there was a little bit of gathering, right? And that was something that was a little bit of a concern to me.
Yeah, and you did not see him at the combine perform either of the cone measurements, right? And that, to me, you're seeing less of that now when you look at the data. And by the way, there was an article that I wrote for Pro Football Focus a couple years ago, back when there was no combine, saying, pro day data and combine data are different, right? So you got to take the pro day data with a grain of salt relative to the combine data. That's where a lot of these guys will do some of their agility drills. They don't do them at the combine because the combine is incredibly fair. The turf is not fast. It won't make you look the best. And a lot of these guys don't do that, right? And, we are building at Sumer some really cool, on-field measurements that'll pick up on that kind of stuff. Really cool, really great stuff by Udit Ranazari and Pavel Babashevitz that are like really good looks into this stuff that I'm really excited for. And that's a good thing that you picked up on there. So like he basically can't be in a scheme. Like, does that preclude him from being in a zone scheme where you kind of have to wait, and then cut immediately when you see that? Like, what kind of scheme does that, kind of eliminate him from being like an elite player in?
Well, look, I don't see him necessarily hitting the hole and then, being able to adjust in the hole. We often say that, like with running backs, right? I've said this at the beginning of the program. I mean, that ability to bend properly and to jam your foot in the ground and get out, the explosive side to it, the ability to bend, be behind things. It comes back to body control. I truly wonder what his true body control is. I'm not saying it's poor in any way. I'm just saying there's a limit there. Is it truly a 5 or a 6 where you really want that guy who's going to be a 7 body control, right? Again, back to 7 being very good, 8 being excellent, 9 being rare in our scheme. This is one of those things that was a concern of mine. It will be interesting to see, where is he projected to go? Is he projected in the 3rd round? If there's a way.
Yeah, we're looking 3rd or 4th round here, which, those guys, you want eventually a running back in that part of the draft to start for you, at least in a pinch. Right. I think about like Alexander Madison. I think about like guys like that who are really good change of pace backs, maybe their whole career. That might be more of the style here where, you have him play behind like a really like elite runner, and he can come in and be surprisingly good as a pinch guy. But to your point about this, it's like, it's maybe one of those situations where he can get, short yardage stuff with his breaking tackle ability and everything, but maybe not an explosive guy, which one of the things that Tay Seth, like one of our great data scientists, found is like explosive ability is one of the key things that projects college to pro. We actually had a really good question, and I do want to finish the pod with this, is like, how sticky is yards after contact per carry from college to NFL? Like there are, and you see like the really smart teams sort of, operate this way. There are like 3 things that map from college to pro: how good you are on what are called perfectly blocked, like how explosive you are when the play is blocked up. That's a big one. How explosive you are on explosive play rate is a huge, predictor from college to pro for running backs. The other 2 are big ones: yards per carry after contact and missed tackle rate. If you can, and like the Bills did like a really good job with this. They like drafted Zach Moss and Devin Singletary exactly for that. And what they missed was those guys weren't great yards after contact guys. They were good break tackle guys, but they wouldn't. So then they went after the guy who was a great explosive guy in this past draft, in James Cook. And so like that's kind of how they try to complete the running back group. But those are the 3 things that, if you are just like, if you get a PFF subscription, or hopefully one day a Sumer subscription, and you're like, I want to look at exactly what I need to look at with respect to running backs, it's how good are they at breaking tackles, how good are they at getting yards after contact, and how many explosive plays that they can generate in the run game. Those are the 3 things that I look at statistically in running backs.
Great. Love your dialogue and how you articulated that. In the
awesome.
end.
Well, this was great. And I was thinking about, talking to you about this. It's like, obviously you had your time with New England, all those great running, Lawrence Maroney, and like, I talked about Sammy Morris, and then you had Corey Dillon, of course. Corey Dillon, everybody thought he was washed, right. And then he went to New England, was fantastic. You had Kevin Falk, of course, some great backs there. And then your time in Atlanta, Michael Turner, Darius Norwood, Devontae Freeman. And I even had to say this to you. I've been watching a lot of XFL. My friend, I'm giving my buddy Bruce Gradkowski a shout, the offensive coordinator for the St. Louis Battlehawks. Their running back, Brian Hill, also a draft pick by one Thomas Dimitrov, probably the best running back in that entire league. So this has been, it's been fun picking your brain about this stuff. We have just gotten a lot of really cool comments. I do want to give you your flowers here. Jameson Evers, one of our frequent listeners. Listening to Thomas is always such a treat. Just hearing the way he talks about football is fascinating, because the way he thinks is sometimes so important, but I never thought of them before. There is certainly value, I think, in this podcast, getting both of our points of view out there. And we do really appreciate you all joining us, especially this late as we reach 10:30 Eastern time. If you like this show, please give it a like on YouTube. If you're listening to this in podcast form later on, please like, Subscribe, rate, and review on all of your podcast platforms. And do us a favor. Tell your friend about the show, especially if you like it. Tell it. We hope to have a very unique show, and we hope in 1 month's time to have the best draft show out there for your viewing pleasure on day one of the draft. So for Thomas Smithstroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been the Sumer Sports Show.